This is the Culture Change Paradoxes webinar series from Onefish, Twofish, and I'm Carrie Bedingfield. Culture is complex, and even if you were to follow all the steps in the great book that you've just read or the slide share that you found online, you would almost certainly not get the outcome in the big change project plan that you wrote at the start. Onefish, Twofish has been helping organisations become faster and more agile and more high trust, more collaborative for 13 years, and what's clear in a complex system like culture is that it doesn't consistently respond to modern management techniques. So in this webinar series, you'll hear conversations with our team exploring how to address different aspects of culture and engagement complexity. And our aim is to help you put a language to some of the paradoxes you've been experiencing. These might help you to plan and execute your work differently, to talk to the business about it differently, and even to change your view about what the big goal is. The Culture Change Paradoxes series is for people at mastery level, and full notes will be shared with the recording afterwards. So any technical terminology, any references to people or other links and resources will be shared. And today we're looking at balancing driving culture versus allowing culture to emerge. With me is Tracee Finch.
Hello, hi.
Hi Tracee, and Tracee's part of the Onefish, Twofish team. She's been working on culture for 20 years and she has also had culture done to her. She's recently been involved in a wide range of successful and in some cases award-winning projects designed to both drive and allow culture to emerge. And today we get to probe her experiences. So Tracee, I'm going to start with the big question, which is, what is wrong with how companies do culture at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, wrong. I guess if you come up with the right intention, there's no wrong way to try and improve places to work. But I think traditionally companies would come at this from a controlled top-down approach and potentially see employees as something that they need to fix, or that dynamic is something that needs to be fixed. Whereas the companies that are really thriving and developing are really tapping into the energy and commitment of their people to create better places to work. You can't make people be engaged. All you can really do is create the right conditions.
And what happens in your experience when organisations do try to drive or control a change in culture? So can you describe any of the scenarios where we naturally and use some of the techniques we use for many other the planning processes in the businesses and where it completely falls flat?
Sure. I think when people have any change done to them, you lose your sense of control, and that creates stress. And if companies do have a tendency, and they've done it traditionally in the past to create a competitive advantage, when you wanted to do well in business, you created a lot of policies, you gave people very task-focused job descriptions, you applied ways in which you can control the way the employees did things to get a consistent outcome to consistently perform well. But today, you really need people to be able to bring their best selves and to contribute to the success of the organisation. And in order to do that, they need to have a sense of control, to understand the overarching purpose behind things, and to feel that they have an opportunity to contribute and shape the overall outcome that is best for everyone in the organisation.
So let's get really practical.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to quiz you on a whole range of aspects of the culture change process, and I'd love to hear your views on what have you literally done in those scenarios where you're trying to pick your way between driving engagement and culture forward versus allowing it to emerge. So if we think about how large companies typically plan things, there's often a really big PowerPoint deck, and there's quite a long sign-off process, and there are a lot of goals and outcomes that are specified long before the work is started. So does that mean if culture is emergent that we should ditch any of that planning process? How have you tackled that in a business that probably does want some kind of plan?
Yeah, I think that the balance is to have a direction. The way we did it at the telco company, we did some great stuff. And I think the balance is around, we set a really strong overall direction. The outcome was really clear. The scope and what we wanted to achieve and where we wanted to get to was really clear. And then I think it was really brave of them. This was the first time we did it, that the leadership team said, okay, but the how, let's leave that to the people. And I'd love to say that it was purely like this very big organic organizing group at the time, but it was kind of driven, it was kind of controlled, but the how was given over to a group of employees who had no experience of cultural change programs, just came and brought their life experience and their own subject matter expertise to the party, and they were just empowered just to get on and do. And that was a really powerful thing for not just the people involved in that, but also for the company. And at the end of it, it was incredibly successful. The award was won, and I can go into more detail about how we got there. But it became like a blueprint then for how we design and embed cultural change in the company.
So it sounds like there was a working group is the sort of traditional word we would give to that. So first question is, were those people given time out of their normal day job? Was any space carved out so that they had room to think about and do things?
Yes and no. Yes, in theory, yes. I think the company itself is very fast-paced and has, like many companies, they have shareholders to answer to and KPIs to deliver and so on and so forth. But yes, in the essence, they were given the space to play with the problem. So it didn't. There were times that there was pressure. That is obvious. There were times where peak business times when it was difficult for people to balance their day jobs with what they needed to do in the working group. But everyone was really engaged and committed to solving this problem. And there was no pressure in this particular project from the leadership team to deliver something at a certain time. The group itself defined the timeline. And that did give us the space to play and fully understand the problem and experiment with things without feeling that time-bound pressure to deliver something. The flip side is that it did take a long time. And in today's organizations, things move quickly and potentially you'd want to expedite that in the future. But the beauty of it was we did have the space to play with the problem.
And how important was being able to set your own timelines?
For that project, when we'd never done anything like it, and where there was a team of people who, some people wanted to be there, some people had been volunteered, some people have an interest in the stuff, and some people would have just, I don't really understand all this fluffy thing stuff that you're trying to make me do right now. So it was incredibly important that I think you can't underestimate when you're putting working groups together, that it can take time unless you've got a way to expedite that, to facilitate storming and forming that group really quickly. It can take time for that group to be as effective as they need to be when there's a big, meaty problem to solve. The time and space is important, yeah.
So I'm fascinated by this concept of time, and Dave Snowden, who we have mentioned before in this webinar series, who's an expert on complexity sciences, talks about the idea, the concept of trying to define time for changing something in a complex system as being a nonsense. And he would take quite an extreme view and say, we don't set goals and timelines in our relationships at home. We don't set agenda items or fixed points for our friendships. And he draws the comparison, and he's not saying in my opinion, organisations shouldn't set timelines. He's saying it's fruitless to do so. And he advocates setting a direction. Often our relationships and friendships have a direction, or they're on some kind of trajectory, but removing the time pressure allows the team to move in that direction in a complex system more effectively. And I wonder, does that chime with your experience?
Definitely, because I think when we then tried to apply the blueprint in another scenario where there was more of a time-bound expectation, or people thought, well, that was great what we did with the values and the branding and that engagement, that project. But when we tried to apply it somewhere else where there was a time-bound element and the direction wasn't as clear, it wasn't as successful.
Interesting. So let's talk about what that team did. So you've got, drawing a little bit on my knowledge of that organisation, you've got a group of people who are clever, nice people, open, forward-thinking, progressive, not experts in culture necessarily, and doing the best they can to take what's made them successful at work so far and apply that to quite a different kind of challenge. So how did you go about doing that?
I actually found it really difficult. When we had this conversation preparing for this webinar, I found it really difficult to remember all the things that we did. I wrote all the post-it notes down. I almost got Sharpie inhalation, just listing everything that happened. But I think the key thing was, again, it was that space and time up front when no one expected anything from us. So we were able to almost go away and try to understand the problem and what we're being asked to do and get clarity around that. We also, I think, we involved the rest of the business. So although the working group was set up, we didn't do that. We didn't work in isolation, that we did talk to the business frequently and often and got feedback from them. So every time that we had an idea or a way forward, then we would either check in with the leadership team or we'd go out to the business and say, this is where we're going with this. This is what we've heard. Can we show you where we are so far? So that we were consistently getting feedback that told us we're on the right track, because it's really difficult. You don't want to check yourself in a room and pop out 10 months later with something that doesn't look and feel or sound right. So I think that check-in process that we had with the business was really important. And we did that in ways that would easily engage people through mood boards and testing words. And, the team acted as reps out with the business as well. And I think not only did the team weren't just responsible for solving the problem, which was in this case coming up with a new set of values. They were also then tasked with delivering and embedding it. So we didn't come up with a bunch of stuff and then hand it to the leadership team and then flip it and it become a top-down controlled delivery into the organization. That team also then identified all the different ways we could embed this throughout the entire employee experience, looked at the blockers, the barriers, the opportunities, and then we split ourselves up into work streams that could go and deliver those smaller pieces of work. And again, that space and time, we had to take big chunks out of people's weeks to do that. And again, unless you're doing that differently by getting people off site and compressing that, you do need that time in your week.
And can you describe any of the some examples of some of those experiments, or what was the content of some of those mood boards as far as you're able to share? So what kind of things were you exploring?
In terms of the values themselves and how we presented them back to the business?
So in terms of and maybe it's helpful first of all to outline what was the north point of that working group? What were you running towards?
Yeah, so we were tasked with, the outcome was a new set of values that would set the business up for where it needed to go, where it needed to be. We started with, we did have some values, some behaviours, but they were like a sticking plaster that had gotten the business to where it needed to be, but they were hygiene factors. And the company now needed to develop a new set of behaviours to sort of ramp up, step up, go to the next phase. And so, I think the group had a lot of data that was key as well, and I think it helped that there was someone from whose job was people and culture being in that group, because they had that person was me in that instance, and I had access to a lot of data. I had access to all of the interviews we had done, because we were running this in parallel with our employer branding. Who are we as a company? What does it feel like to work here? So we'd done a lot of interviews with people to uncover what it felt like to work at MBNL, the telco. And then we also had access to all our engagement data. We had access to, just a huge amount of insight coming in. So that was incredibly useful. And we could use that to say, this is how we've heard you, this is how we've listened to you, this is how we've got your input business, and then turn that into, we used mood boards. And that was really, the mood boards we played back to the rest of the business were very much stick and paste. They were very basic. They were pictures off the internet stuck on A4 boards and shared with the business. But people really liked them. For some reason, they really, really resonated with people. There were some words which broadly expressed what those meant to be, and some images which we felt brought them to life for people. And they were really successful. They landed really well. And I think we knew then we couldn't move too far away from those. And we were very careful when we came to deliver the final product that it wasn't too polished and it didn't feel like the company anymore.
And is there, what's your thinking about why those mood boards resonated with people, and whether would it have been different if you'd worked for quite some time, possibly with an agency, spent quite a lot of money, produced stuff that was more finished and more polished and possibly looked more high impact? Would that have been any different, and would it have been better or worse?
I don't know is the answer, because we didn't do it that way. I get the feeling from how well it did work, and how when we did start to try and polish it up, people told us to bring it back. The feedback was, don't go there, bring it back. We liked what you first showed us. I'm trying to put my finger on how we got it so right, and I don't know. I think it just must be. I think it's because we listened so carefully. We had a lot of input from the wider business before we started, and we used that as our basis to create these mood boards, to create this set of values. And the company itself it's growing and it's developing, but at its heart, people really valued that family feel, that almost startup feel to the company. And so if we'd gone too far and taken it too polished, and it would just not feel like us anymore.
And I think you're mentioning two scenarios really where you were showing work in progress rather than trying to present a finished outcome. One was with the leadership team, where you kept checking back in and saying, this is what we've been working on, this is what's worked so far, this is what hasn't, and crucially expressing what hadn't worked, as well as what trying to sort of, rather than trying to sell what had, and also showing work in progress to people in the business. And it feels like that's quite a crucial element of, and certainly that's a kind of fundamental part of the way we work as a team, is to constantly show work in progress. And there's something about a finished item which closes down a conversation in a way that and puts the recipient on the other side of the table in a way that work in progress draws people to the same side of the table.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, when we showed them the mood boards, they had an opportunity to input and to say what they liked and didn't like about it. And as you say, when you say someone a finished product, they'll have a response to that, but you won't necessarily be able to unpick, or they won't be able to unpick why they're responding in that way. And so you don't know where to go from there. Whereas with the mood boards, we got, again, a lot of insight, a lot of feedback, and then we knew where to take it next, and we knew where not to take it as well.
So creating values or calibrating values as part of stepping into the next phase of the organisation's future, that's great. Lots of organisations do that. You and I are working on another project right now doing exactly the same thing. But ultimately, the process of creating these values has a value in its own right, and let's explore that a bit later. But their value is in their ability to drive or allow change to happen. So can you describe what you did with those values, and to what extent you drove them, or to what extent was it push, and to what extent you allowed pull?
Okay, so I think the way that we drove it was, for start there, then there are some places and touch points, I guess, in the organisation that we felt needed to be aligned. Now, another company might go about this a different way, but the way that we recruit and onboard people, having the values embedded into that process so that the people who are coming on board understood what was expected of them when they got here, and you could test those values and bring it into the interview process and start to explore behaviours with people. Performance management, that's one way it was driven, I guess, is to say you're now not only measured on what you get done, but also the way that you work. That was embedded in performance management. I think one of the ways that it was more organically grown was we introduced a recognition scheme. So, and we listened to people about the way that they wanted that recognition scheme to be done. So historically we had a process where people were put forward, or they were put forward, and then those people were sort of rated and judged, and then a winner was sort of picked out every month, and then we would call them out and they'd stand up in front of everyone and get it, and then they got the same prize regardless of what effort or what outcome was given. So we designed a new recognition scheme which was more peer-to-peer based, and where managers were able to individualize the reward and recognition according to what the outcome was or what the effort was. And then there is another layer to that as well, which is like MD recognition. But it's really the peer-to-peer stuff where people could recognize and reward those values in others, where it organically grew from there.
So I'm going to see if I can put those things into two different categories. So you've got the driving part does come from the more traditional parent-child style relationship that we're familiar with organisations that got us through the industrial era and out the other side. And at Onefish, Twofish, we've often eschewed that and said parent-child bad, adult to adult good. And broadly speaking, I do think that's the direction we're moving in. But when you talk about using values as a hard edge to recruitment, so who you let into your corporate castle, and as a performance measure, how much money goes in your bank account potentially, or how possible it is to gain a more senior role, that they do fall into the parent-child category, versus some of these more organic methods. They're still structured, so an employee recognition scheme, highly structured, but it sounds like that comes from the adult to adult dynamic, where the people who are potentially receiving an award are also the people who are designing how that award structure might work, and they're the people voting for who does and doesn't get the award.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think also a couple of the other ways that it organically grew was through storytelling. So as I mentioned, we ran it in parallel with our employer brand, and I think that opportunity to launch both the values and the employer brand at the same time allowed us to tell the story of our company again. And so we were enabled to say, this is where we've come from, this is who we are, this is what we believe, this is what we're about, and this is where we're going. And that gave people an overarching, I guess, context to what we were doing. And then you can then see why these particular sets of values are important to get us to where we're going. This got us so far, this is where we're going, this is what we need. So again, people could see the value and the purpose behind them. And I think we also gave people tools, like a toolkit as well, at around the same time, to have conversations around feedback that could either challenge or recognize good and I don't want to say bad behavior, but good and not so good, not so, the stuff that isn't stacking up. So there was the introduction of good feedback conversations, and we were able to model that. And also, there were advocates and champions in the business who wanted to model this stuff. So, the leadership team being some obvious people who are modeling the behaviours, and also the group itself. They were out there working in these ways. Part of the group itself, by setting the group up in that way, we're already modeling some of those new behaviours as well. And I think, when we won the award, people saw, oh, wow, that working in that way is really powerful. And we knew it was good, but the world has just, recognized that as well. And we had that external validation.
So let's talk a bit about the award. So everything you've mentioned so far, nothing that you've mentioned would be unfamiliar to anybody listening or watching to this. So the categories of things you've done include things like employee recognition, creating, and you mentioned the word launch, which we'll come back to as well, launching values, employer brand, using a working group in a peer-to-peer way. All these are things that other organisations would do, but with considerably less success. And what you haven't talked about are things like making salaries public, or banning PowerPoint and Excel, or anything or banning email, or anything hugely radical or disruptive. So, and yet you beat off so many fantastic projects to win this award. So what was it that was so powerful about what you're very modestly describing as creating and launching values?
I think it was by the company, by the people, for the people and the company. And we did work with you guys, but we only really called you guys in when we really felt that we had hit a wall and we couldn't take it any further, or we needed that little bit of extra shine on the end of it. So, we didn't have a massive budget. We couldn't spend a lot of money on the fancy stuff that might otherwise, support this. It had to be real, it had to be authentic, it had to be practical, it had to be deeply delivered. We did a huge amount of stuff in a very short amount of time. I say we had a long time to play with the project, but I think it was like from February to September, and then from September onwards it was bam. It was delivered by the team who created it as well. So I think it was just that we didn't just give lip service to the working group. We didn't just say, give us a little bit of input now, and then we're going to take it and roll with it and shine it up and polish it into something, and thanks for your input. It was the fact that it was at all stages designed, shaped and delivered by the group, and it had the full support of the leadership team.
And can you think aloud about what changed in the organisation? So if the goal was to shine a spotlight on the new values and behaviours that would be crucial for providing the sort of the structural integrity for where you want to go forward, for securing the future of the business, what impact did that have, and how did you know if people had even kind of taken on board any of those and understood any of those things?
Yeah. It is tricky because sometimes it is intangible, and I think one of the first things was when we launched them, we gave people the space to talk about them. So we didn't just give people a desk drop saying, this is it, this is these are them, this is what we expect from you, this is what it looks like. We'd had the space to play with the problem. Now we needed to give people the space to talk about it. And so when we launched them, one of the first things we did was get the whole business, I think in a month, in rooms, in workshops, or I wouldn't call them workshops, we call them experiences, I guess. They were just conversations. They were a way to say, what does this mean to you? So people were able to also individualize them. What do you understand by these values? What does this mean to you? And what are you going to do differently? So people were already on that path. They started to think about what they could be doing differently. And it did mean different things to different people, but broadly, as long as we felt it was going to get the outcomes that we were looking for, then great. You know, the recognition scheme is another way to sort of see if people feel or think that they're being lived. So, you know, launching, we had a thing called Trailblazers, you know, which is the peer-to-peer. And so we gave people some advice, I guess, on how to do that, so that it wasn't just great job, high five. You know, that there was quite specific information about how behaviours were lived and breathed and why that behaviour had that outcome and what was the impact on that. So you could see from the sorts of nominations and recognition that was taking place whether things were actually happening in the way that we wanted it to. I think they're the two main things. You know, we gave people a space to talk about it so they fully understood it and could individualize it. And then we could see that it was being done because people were recognizing that in each other. They could see it in each other. We did put it in our engagement survey that we ran and says, you know, are they being lived and breathed? And on the whole, you know, they were. So they're the main way.
And what was your approach to people who felt that the whole thing was quite fluffy? It was hard to put a finger on why this was so important, hard to kind of get a grip on it, and those people all the way through to those people who were pretty cynical and didn't really want to talk about it.
Largely, even the people who feel that the stuff is fluffy, I think we started from a really good place. I'll be honest, you know, we didn't start from a place where we had a lot of disengaged people who didn't want to be at work and who weren't enjoying what they did. We started from a really good place. So even the people who felt that this was fluffy stuff that I didn't really understand, I think, you know, when you can say, if we do this, we'll get this, and what's in it for you is X, Y, Z, and I'm drawing a blank on some examples of that, then it makes it easier for them to put that into context. And I think, again, the opportunity that we gave people to talk about it to each other, so they could bounce ideas off each other, like, oh, if I do it this way, you know, what are you trying to do today that if you applied the values could have a different outcome? What are you struggling with today? You know, let's have a think about what you could do differently, and you get a different outcome. And people could start to see how they could practically apply it. Then that's when people could see what was in it for them and that it had value.
Got it. And are there any examples specific examples you can think of different ways that people did start to behave, or things that you started to see here in the organisation that showed you, yeah, things are changing?
Yeah, I think one of our values was around the way that people work together. And again, I think that program of work showed people a different way of working together just by doing it as well. And so we were demonstrating the value while we were doing the work. And like I say, it became kind of a blueprint, and people got quite excited about there being a new way to work together to solve problems. And so I think there was just a new appetite to not just get involved in your job task stuff, and to collaborate on other problems and solutions and get involved in other aspects that are more about the whole business and helping the whole business to shine than just about you and your role and your job. So I think that was one of the key differences there, and people being more willing to put their hand up and be proactive about being a part of shaping change.
So it sounds like the way in which you ran that team project gave other people not just an example and an exemplar of what a different way of working might look like, but it also gave them a bit of permission that it's okay to work this way.
Yeah, definitely, and that it might be hard, it might be difficult to do on top of your day job, or within your day job and with your day job, but it is fun and it's rewarding, and I think, you know, it showed people that what was in it for them is also that opportunity to raise your profile, because it can be very good. You know, if you're putting yourself forward and being a part of one of these sorts of projects, then it does raise your profile. And it is personally rewarding, because you will learn skills that you can transfer into any role or place or space, because it's about relationships and people and having the tough conversations that need to happen to get things done and to break through barriers. It's about grappling with things that aren't necessarily tangible and that might not have, you know, we didn't know what the outcome of this was going to be when we started, you know, and even the people in the group have no idea. You know, I wrote some values and stuck them on my drawer and thought, I think that's where it might go, and it was nowhere near that by the time we'd finished. It was way better. So I think people also learnt that you know, having a diverse group of people with the diverse experiences will create a better outcome as well. So yeah, I'm not sure I answered your question there.
Yeah, and I guess if I think about the way in which what that organisation delivers, high tech, high engineering focus, this presumably is quite a different way of working. So what kind of mindsets were you needing to, or wanting to kind of break? What were you wanting to give people permission to do?
Traditionally, it's a very task-focused organisation, and we do this and we get that result. And I think that was the main barrier, the main thing we had to overcome was showing people that it is as important. And I think when things get tough and when there's a customer or someone wanting their thing done, that this also deserves time and space. So, you know, you don't want, people have to commit to it. Leaders have to give people the time, and people have to turn up to those meetings consistently. You know, if that working party has a meeting, they've got to turn up to that consistently, or it's not going to happen. I think that was the one thing we had to overcome. You know, when you are an organisation that has KPIs and measurements and people you have to answer to, sometimes there's something needs to be done, and you've got to go to that 2-hour culture change meeting, and there has to be that prioritization. We all get that sometimes the rest of the group, you know, there's going to be times when the group has to pick up for someone else or something, and I think that's about contracting that group in the first place and having that adult thing. There's going to be times people can't be there for whatever reason. Let's assume that the intention is the best, and we will all pull together and work ahead. But the commitment has to be there from the start. The intention has to be good, and it can't just drop when things get tough.
And what do you think? So interestingly, we're talking now about how do you create the conditions in which the conditions for culture change can emerge. So what were the conditions that needed to be in place for that team to be able to effectively work on it and itself create conditions for change?
Yeah. So I think the thing is that the leadership team had to be fully bought into what was about to happen. And it's the same with other things that we've done. I think starting with the leadership team being all in the same place on this and being really clear with what is the group being tasked with, what's in their remit, what's in their sphere of control, and what can they influence and what isn't. So, you know, this is your task, this is what we need from you, this is the outcome, and these are the parameters, with which being really clear about those parameters, I think. Otherwise, you know, the group could run off and do something that is just, or just spend thousands of money. You've got to have some parameters, you know. So everyone needs to know exactly what is expected and what you know, and to agree to allow people to have the space and time to do it. And I think that was the key thing up front, was getting that commitment. Sometimes it didn't quite work, sometimes it didn't pan out, but overall everyone was bought into it. So that is one of the main conditions, you know, that the group has to be really clear on what's the outcome expected of them. There's some parameters that are really well understood. So what is our decision making levels of, what are our levels of decision making? Where does it stop? How often do we need to check in with people? So you're empowered, but you're not rogue. You're not just off. There are check-in points. We had a sponsor. We had a couple of sponsors actually, and we learned a lot from that. The sponsor has to have a really clear role. So there was a leadership sponsor, but I think in the first time we did this around the values, we didn't get what we needed from them, and I don't think we were clear enough about what we needed from them or what their role was or how they could support the group. And I think going forward, when we've done this, we now know that we need to get a bit more clarity around that sponsorship role as well, and how they can help get decisions made and free up any blockers for that group to move forward.
And was there any kind of learning mechanism that you used, either informally, formally, systematically, ad hoc, that allowed the group to sort of self-examine as it went along and make changes as it learned more about what was going to work and not work about that group? So you mentioned the sponsor was a role that as you progressed through the project, it was clear that needed defining more tightly. How did the team learn and improve as it went along?
I think, if I'm honest, in the group it was really ad hocly. That was just through tough conversations, and there were some, there were tears spilled over this. It wasn't always easy, and I think people's overarching willingness to deliver a really good result really, so these are bright people, clever people who inherently want to do a good job and are engaged in their work. So that always overcame, any difficulties that we had. But so the learning, we did stumble. We didn't have a nice polished way of learning, I would say. We did do a lot of reflection at the end. And that's when we sort of captured our lessons and tried to apply them. And we shared them with the leadership team. We shared them with new groups that were being set up. And some of those lessons are still being applied today in some of the new groups. But I would like to say that we had some fancy way of doing it. We didn't. We did stumble and we did lurch, but we learned a lot. And at the end, we captured our lesson.
And maybe that's one of the learnings is is how to learn more quickly. So I'm just going to before I invite questions, I'm just going to try and summarize some of the principles that you've shared, if I can remember them all, in a way that links it back to this concept of culture as a complex system. So you talked about having a north point, a direction of travel that everybody was clear about, and that remained no matter what the strategy or tactics turned out to be.
Yeah.
So clearly separating those two things out. That absolutely ties in with Ralph Stacey, with Dave Snowden, and what we know about complexity science. You also talked about removing timescales or not imposing an arbitrary timescale that would
crush creativity.
That would crush creativity, and that would force the group to try and use traditional management techniques to solve a problem that probably was not going to respond to traditional high control management techniques. Mm-hmm. You talked about constraints. So in complexity science, we talk about different types of constraints, but one type is enabling constraints. So as on a slight tangent, if we think about all the things that create friction in business, email, meetings, things we work on a lot at Onefish, Twofish, it's interesting sometimes to reflect on the fact that, do we have a meeting problem, or do we have a decision-making problem? Do we have an ownership problem? Do we have a clarity problem? Is that the source of that? And so creating some constraints around what decisions can be made and what can't, and how those check-ins need to happen, how information needs to flow, can be hugely liberating. So that's three things so far. For the first 42 minutes of this conversation, it sounded to me like the best, most brilliantly functioning team, the most kind of totally positive, you know, no problems, hitchless project in the whole world, which I'm deeply admiring of. And then you said, yes, we did stumble and tears were shed. And and of course that's true in so many projects, but I think what I'm drawing from that is you kind of said yes to the mess. There's a brilliant book called Say Yes to the Mess, which people are always waving at me because I really don't like mess particularly, but it sounds to me like you accepted the ups and downs of the journey and the kind of messiness and the non-linearness of the journey as just part of this slightly more emergent way of working. Is that right?
Oh, so I've got a circle on with this: embrace uncertainty and feel your way. I think, you know, don't set the how, and be prepared to go all over the places and in directions that you didn't think it would go. And when there's people involved with different experiences and diverse backgrounds and coming at it from different places, it's going to get messy, and you're going to have to let go and roll with it.
Absolutely. And in order to roll with it, the bit that you said you you might improve for the future was to have more of a systematic way of learning. So you could pick up on things that were taking you off course more quickly and correct course and kind of continue in your direction more effectively and efficiently. Also absolutely part of a kind of complex adaptive system approach, which is absolutely wonderful. One of the things I would add as an outsider is I think there were people in the organisation, including you and including at least one person I know is on the call today, who were fantastic at continually pointing at those things. So it's all very well for us to talk about that now, but how do you do it in practice when the deadlines are coming thick and fast for other things, the organisation's got KPIs, it's very difficult, as you say, to prioritise that 2-hour culture meeting above your other more tangible things. You need somebody, probably more than one person, who's constantly saying yes, and this is just how it's got to be, who's kind of saying reassuring things all the time and pointing back at the picture, pointing back at but this is how we need to do this, and don't worry, it'll be absolutely fine. And I would also add that as one of the really crucial elements that created the success that you talk about. And I wondered if you might reflect on that before we invite a couple of questions.
I would say that that's right. I think, I mean, personally, I was the person leading that group, but someone always had my back. There was always a safe place for me to go to and to talk to about any challenges I had. And also, the person who was championing that in the wider business and with the leadership team, and when we hit stumbling blocks, we would go and have that empowering conversation that removed blockers, and was the conscience of the team as well. You know, everyone committed to this, so that person was, you know, we were the leadership conscience on this. You know, you said you were committed to delivering this, so give us the space, give us the time, and do it. But I do think any group like this needs at least one person who's going to stand above us and love it, own it, nurture it, and see it through to the end.
So that kind of circles us right back to the original intention for this webinar series, which is to give people who play that role, who play your role in leading the team, who play a role in that team, the language, the confidence to stand their ground and keep pointing at the picture, and to have other people's back. So you said someone had your back, presumably said somebody had that person's back, you had a lot of other people's back. We need the often a way of the real confidence to stand our ground and to hold other people's back, and to not to panic when we get into that messy phase. So my great desire is that people on this call are again, you know, noting down some key phrases, absorbing some of the ways in which you describe it, so they can keep pointing back at that picture to their own organisation very confidently.
Yeah.
So if you would like to ask Tracee a question, you can type it into the group chat, and I'll pick it up from there and ask it on your behalf, or you can just unmute yourself and ask Tracee. Sometimes people ask questions, sometimes people don't, but we do have a few minutes if anybody did want to ask Tracee a question.
Hi, Tracee. I've got a question for you.
Hi, Rick.
What have you seen in culture change work of teams sort of bringing in inspirational ideas or features they've witnessed in other places? So maybe other firms they've worked at, or other stakeholders that their company have worked alongside. Do organizations welcome that, or is it kind of not invented here syndrome?
I personally haven't witnessed the not invented here syndrome. Thank goodness. I think, you know, stuff coming in from the outside may or may not work in a new culture and in a different organization. But why wouldn't you want to invite that in? Why wouldn't you want to hear that and see how you might apply something that's already been done, save you time, effort, energy? You know, there's so much good learning out there that I would always invite it in, and I think we did invite it in our culture change program. So luckily, I haven't experienced the no, thank you, don't want to hear what you did at your other company.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? So we'll pause there for today. We continue next week with the webinar series with Rick Harris, who will talk about how to encourage adoption and establishment of organisational values without asking people to sell their souls and to behave in a way that is inauthentic to them. So that's the complexity and the dilemma we're exploring next week. So for this week, goodbye from me and goodbye from Tracee. All the webinars are available on www.onefishcomms.co.uk. Many thanks.